Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, or it could be whiskey with an analyst reading a spreadsheet, linking crime events, identifying a series, and getting the latest scoop on association news and training. So please don't beat that analyst and join us as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has 10 years of law enforcement analysis experience. He is a member of the Ontario Crime Analysis Network, and he recently is a certified law enforcement analyst with IACA. He's here to talk about, among other things, cyber vigilantism. Please welcome Eathan Lindsay. Eathan, how are we doing?
I'm good, Jason. How are you?
Doing well. It was nice seeing you at the IACA conference last month.
It was, yeah.
And we are going to talk a little bit about IACA, and we are actually going to also talk about the IALEA conference coming up this spring. So we do have a lot to go over, and we're going to get Eathan's contributions to the profession and perspective. We're also going to talk about associations and education. But first, Eathan, how did you discover the law enforcement analysis profession?
That's an interesting question. To be honest, I didn't discover this as a profession until I was well into graduate school, which looking back is so crazy because I studied criminology and law and policing for like several years. And then it was either I was asleep in class and didn't hear it, or I had blinders on and sort of knew that thought this wasn't a profession I would go into and just sort of didn't hear it being mentioned. But yeah, I think I was in my first year of my PhD when I realized, oh, this is something I could really like sink my teeth into and do well. Sort of as a field, like it bridged all of my interests. It bridged law and criminology and data and research and analysis. So I started sort of to look into this as a profession, and I applied, and sort of the rest is history. I'm very happy to have worked in this field for a few years now.
Yeah. So up until that point, what was your plan? Because as you mentioned, you're in the PhD program. So what were you thinking about after your PhD?
Mm-hmm. Well, when I was in my master's degree, I thought that I would either go into law, become a lawyer, or continue academia and become a professor. When I was in my PhD, I thought for sure, like, I would like to become a professor. This is what I want to do. But as you and other people might know, like, your school drains you a little bit. And when you're sort of researching and reading and writing all the time, for me at least, like I started to get this feeling like I would love to actually apply what I'm studying, like work in policing instead of just sort of researching and thinking about policing. And so I started to look into professions, which I definitely should have already known about being in that field for so long, but I started to look into professions that I could get into, and crime analysis is one of them. So when I found that, I applied and I got a position and I left the PhD. That was 10 years ago now. And professionally, it was like the best decision I could have made. I love this field. So that's how I discovered law enforcement analysis.
Yeah. So I guess what in particular attracted you to the profession?
Again, I sort of think it was just like how it bridged all of the things I was interested in. For the longest time, I thought I would either go into law or go into research and policing, or at least from a crime analysis perspective. Like there was also the research and data and analysis piece. I've always loved sort of taking like a massive amount of information and trying to synthesize it, make it make sense for people, and also being able to sort of present information or visualize it in different ways. Like it's a creative profession. It lets you really sort of dig and look into multiple things, but sort of just do that digging and do that analysis. And that's what drew me to this.
As you mentioned, you applied, you got the job. This is with Edmonton Police Services. So just take us through maybe those first couple of weeks, or your mindset going in, and what you experienced that for those first couple of weeks.
For the first couple of weeks, I think definitely that imposter syndrome was real. Like I felt that. I still sometimes feel that. I think everyone does, but definitely in the first couple of weeks or couple of months, I felt, oh, I don't know if I'm smart enough to do this role, or if this is necessarily for me. But I also sort of was just so fascinated that I was able to sort of apply some of what I had studied for so long, and also how I noticed that some of the things that I had studied weren't necessarily brought up in policing as often as I thought they might be. But I think it was just sort of those first couple weeks, couple months was fascinating, like just sort of learning on the job, also feeling at times that I was out of place, but just trying to do the best job that I could. And I was so driven, like it's a fascinating position to be in, to work in. And
Mm-hmm.
I was just so open to working as hard as I could, putting in overtime if I had to, just trying to digest everything that there is in this field.
So what were you being asked to do here in the beginning? What was the focus?
So I started as a divisional analyst. So I was basically monitoring sort of the occurrences that were being reported. Every day I was bringing up occurrences that maybe should be looked at a little bit more to my commanders. I was doing a lot of like mapping, so like hotspot analysis, showing problem areas in the city or in the division that I worked in at the time. Sort of doing some products like mapping products, which I love doing. I love visualizing data in different ways. So that was a big part of my first couple months. So I think, yeah, those were probably the big three for my first couple weeks.
You mentioned the imposter syndrome feeling. I can see with your background, there might be two different levels to that because in the States here, there's often talk about the civilian versus sworn. But I can see in which that would be one level. But on the other level that you have is the academic and sworn. And I've been in plenty of meetings where people refer to folks as academic weenies. So I just kind of getting into that a little bit, like both those levels as you're starting out your career here as an analyst.
Yeah, I didn't really actually ever feel that. Like, I think the imposter syndrome was probably intrinsically driven. Like, I was never told like you don't belong here or like your viewpoints aren't valid or anything like that. Like, it was definitely just like driven by my own sense of just feeling overwhelmed. I think in the first like little while, like first probably year or so of being a crime analyst, I think all the police services that I've worked for like are incredible, and I've never had an experience where there's sort of that delineation between sworn versus civilian. I've never felt that. But at the same time, I've also never felt that like academia has no place in policing. I think more and more so it does. I mean, the evidence-based policing movement is like really gaining traction. So I think that's evidence in and of itself that academia does have a place in policing. So again, the imposter syndrome was intrinsically led, never really felt it placed on me by other people, and I got over it pretty quickly, I think.
That's an interesting perspective. In Ontario, with other police services, not just Edmonton, are all analysts civilian?
Yeah, for the most part, yes. Like I think there might be some police services that are still sort of making that transition from sworn analysts to civilian analysts. So maybe there's a mixture of both. But for the most part, I think most police services, and I could be mistaken, but my feeling and my experience has been that most police services have civilian crime analysts as opposed to sworn crime analysts. Yes.
I gotcha. Now, as you're learning the job, is the path established for you, or is this something that they're kind of pointing you in the right direction and you're still feeling out what the job should be?
I think the job has always sort of been well lined, like well described for me. I sort of, yeah, for the most part, I've always known what I'm supposed to be doing. And I've been very fortunate to work with really like experienced, smart analysts who I lean on quite a bit. And if there ever has been a doubt about like how I should do something or whether I'm maybe doing something I shouldn't be, they're always a great resource. So I've never felt that I'm lost. I've never felt like, oh, I don't know what I should be doing. And if I have, like, I can't remember ever feeling that way. But yeah, no, I've worked with really great analysts who've sort of just been really great mentors and guided me in this role for sure.
How long do you think it took? You said you eventually got over it and just felt that you made it, or how long did it take you, do you feel? Do you remember?
Probably halfway through. Like it might have taken like a good like 4 or 5 years before I started to feel like really comfortable and confident in my abilities and like my knowledge of the different systems and databases that we use. And every now and then, like I might work with someone and I'm like, wow, they're so smart. I aspire to be like them. But for the most part, like I'm pretty comfortable with what I do. Yeah. There's always stuff to learn though. I will say that. Like I would never say that I feel like I know everything or I know everything that there is to know about a specific tool. Like I'm always learning new things from different people. So while the imposter syndrome itself might go away, like that feeling of like just feeling out of place might go away, there's always a feeling that there's always things to learn.
Yeah, I can feel that because the programs are changing, the people are changing, policy, what's important is changing. There's so many moving parts that it really is difficult. It's interesting because I don't feel that you talk about different programs. I feel that there's not a lot of time and energy spent exploring. Like you think of there's a ton of programs on Windows, for instance, and I don't know how many people actually take the time or see how some of these free programs could be applied in analysis, for instance.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, totally. You mentioned at the outset of the recording, the certified law enforcement analyst. I recently took that exam, and when I was studying for the exam, I kept coming across in the research in the textbook that I was reading, like how there are free programs out there. There's even very like basic Microsoft tools like Microsoft Access that we can leverage in our role. And I have rarely used Microsoft Access in my role, a couple times, but it's an underused tool. I don't think people necessarily realize how useful it can be, but that's just one example. Yeah, there are so many tools out there that sort of they appear and then they disappear, and then you go to a different police service and they have one but not the other. It's just there's always a new tool to become well versed in or to practice using. So it's a career that requires probably ongoing work, always learning. Yeah.
All right. And so this brings us to your analyst badge story. And for those that may be new to the show, the analyst badge story is a career-defining case or project that an analyst works. And for you, we're about 2020 here, and we're dealing with scrap metal theft.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was maybe a couple of years before 2020, but it definitely sort of bled into that year. Like I think in 2018, I don't know if I have like one bad story. This is just sort of one that I seem to remember pretty prominently, but it was around 2018 where I think I tentatively identified an issue, which was scrap metal thefts in Edmonton. And I think sort of for the longest time, sort of that conventional thought had been, okay, if you sort of look at all of the items that are being stolen and you assign a dollar value to them, commercial and residential break-and enters, those sort of account for like the highest dollar value of items being stolen, like your cash, jewelry, luxury clothing, electronics. That's where the bulk is in those occurrences. But I sort of started to get just anecdotally the feeling that I think scrap metal thefts are actually a really big issue, and I'd like to delve more into it. We were seeing a lot of catalytic converter thefts being stolen at that time, maybe a little bit more than we had in months and years past. And so I started looking into it. I looked at like a whole year's worth of occurrences, and I assigned a dollar value to everything. And at the end of that analysis, I basically said, okay, look, like the amount of just scrap metal, specifically catalytic converters that are being stolen, far outpaces any of the other items that were being stolen in commercial or residential break and enters, for instance. So I brought that to my commanders, and I said, maybe this deserves a little bit more attention. And we got in touch as a service with the bylaw enforcement section in Edmonton at the time. I was invited to a few meetings, and we sort of came armed with some solutions that we might like to see. And at the end of all of those meetings, we were able to introduce legislation. It's a scrap metal dealers and recyclers legislation or something along those lines, where basically pawn shops and scrap recyclers and dealers, they had to take identification of people who were coming in with large amounts of metal. They had to put the information that individual into a database that police could access. And after several months, maybe even closer to a year, we were able to make a pretty key arrest of an individual who we had sort of heard here and there, but he was arrested with over 400 stolen catalytic converters on his trailer. He was trying to transport them out of province. And so that was a pretty interesting project, so to speak, to be involved in, sort of seeing that evolution from tentatively feeling there's an issue to confirming, yeah, there is an issue, bringing that to the commanders and getting that buy-in, getting in touch with the people who can sort of bring about a solution, implementing the solution, and then ultimately sort of seeing the fruits of that solution. So yeah, that's something I remember pretty prominently.
Yeah. In your research, by chance, did you look up the history of catalytic converter theft? It's probably something I can Google, but I am curious to know like who was like the first, where was the first area to experience this phenomena?
That's a good question. No, I hadn't looked into that. That might be something to look into now, but no, I had not looked into that. I don't know when it became an issue or where or how people discovered that there's these precious metals that you can get out of a catalytic converter. I don't know the origins of it, but that definitely warrants some closer looking.
Yeah, no, and it just all of a sudden it was a thing. I remember being at conferences and people started talking about it, and it makes sense. It's the price of that precious metal goes up, and then the juice is worth the squeeze to steal it, right? And to get that return on their investment. So I remember when it came up. I don't remember who the first person was, but it is interesting to think in the history of man that somebody, whoever that was the first person to discover that, like, hey, we can go underneath cars, steal these, and turn a profit. I mean, that caught on like wildfire. Like everybody has this problem through
Yeah.
everywhere. As soon as the prices go up, you see this uptick in catalytic converter theft.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've definitely noticed that, and it's unfortunately it's not really an issue that like just it doesn't discriminate. Like everybody has, or for the most part, everybody's going to have a catalytic converter, right? Unfortunately, as of right now, there's not a whole lot you can necessarily do to protect your vehicle from having its catalytic converter stolen. Not that I'm really aware of, but yeah, it's an issue that impacts everyone for sure.
This is a great example of a problem-solving project, right? This isn't police arresting their way out of a problem. This is the police working with stakeholders to get more information and to curb an activity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had a couple of commanders who've mentioned that exactly what you just said. You cannot arrest your way out of a problem. You need to implement some sort of long-term solution to it. And this was sort of our attempts to implement some solution to this issue that we had been dealing with for a number of months, now years. So yeah.
All right. So I was curious. I just Googled it right now. Teslas don't have catalytic converters. So
Yeah.
I guess as we go electric, we won't ever have this problem.
You're right. Yes. I guess that's one solution you could do is try to get an EV if you can.
Yeah. There's a problem. There's like, hey, you don't want to have this phenomenon anymore. Just everybody go electric.
Yeah.
As you're implementing this, how was the reaction to the scrap yards, right? Because a big part of this problem-solving project is getting their buy-in, getting them on board to, as you said, take IDs, do better documentation, and help curb this phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. I wish I had a better answer for you. I'm not entirely sure what on the scrap metal recyclers side, what their buy-in necessarily was. I just know that they were basically made to follow this legislation. Like, this is coming down and you really don't have a choice. Like you have to follow it. And again, like I also don't know if there were any recyclers who were reluctant to implement it, but yeah, that's probably something we could have looked into more to see what their buy-in was. In terms of buy-in, though, I was just so happy to be involved in this and getting the buy-in sort of from my commanders, because I think a lot of analysts can probably attest to that feeling of trying to maybe say something a few times before you get that buy-in. But this was a really great example of like, here's an issue, bring it to someone and try to get that buy-in right away. And I was so fortunate to get that buy-in right away. So yeah.
Yeah, and you might have said it and I didn't pick it up. Are you the one that you discovered this phenomena? Are you also the one that came up with the idea to get the ordinance?
Oh, no, I was not. That was not my idea.
Okay.
And I also don't know if I was like the one to identify the issue. I sort of just was the one who assigned a dollar value to it.
I see.
Yeah, it wasn't my decision to reach out to the city.
As you mentioned, all these programs seem to really work throughout the country. You see different things like this where just identifying people helps curb behavior. It also reminds me of another great example of for bank robberies. I know now a lot of banks, you can't go in there with sunglasses. And if you have sunglasses on and a hoodie, they'll ask you to, in standing in line, they'll ask you to please remove your sunglasses and pull down your hoodie. And that has curbed behavior of people being identified. So it's just small things like that can make a big difference in deterring crime.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely trying to make those subtle little changes where you can. I agree.
Yeah. So you stay in Edmonton for 6 years, and then you move on to Alberta. Now, for the listeners, and even me, is this, when you transition from Edmonton to Alberta, is that like changing entire different departments, or are you still within the same network? It is maybe like if you work for a state, you move from one city to the other. Is that how it's like, or is this you're totally changing departments at this point?
So Edmonton is in Alberta. So like I moved from Ontario where I was like pursuing my graduate studies, and I moved to Edmonton, Alberta. So, and I was in Edmonton, Alberta for just over 5 years. Yeah. And then from there I moved back to Ontario.
Okay, so when you transfer to Alert, I love the name, Alert, Alberta Law Enforcement Response Teams. This you're essentially coming back home.
I was with the Edmonton Police Service, and I was seconded to Alert, the Alberta Law Enforcement Response Teams, while I still worked for the Edmonton Police. So basically, when you go over to Alert, you're sort of just deciding to focus on one or two specific areas. They handle serious crime. So, and that's I sort of worked in that area at Edmonton Police. Like I dabbled in serious crime, but then going over to Alert, that was sort of my sole focus is serious crime.
Okay. And so what was your focus on with Alert?
I was part of the organized crime gang enforcement team. And so you're sort of just deciding to focus on that one area. Whereas when I was with the Edmonton Police, I sort of mentioned I started as a Vigilant analyst, and then I worked on some drug trafficking investigations. I helped out some other areas, and then ultimately went over to Alert.
Yeah, this is a big study. This is now a focus. So looking back now, what are some things that you learned and did?
I really enjoyed working at Alert. That was the one time that I felt I was sort of getting really interested in one sort of area of work, which was sort of like that drug trafficking realm. I felt like I learned a lot, not only in terms of like just standardized products, but also just about the drug trafficking world. I felt like I learned a lot of what I know now, having been at Alert. And I worked with some amazing investigators as well. So I had a really great time. I look back on my time with Alert with only positive thoughts. Like it was such an amazing experience.
You mentioned investigators. So are you working on cases or a problem of drugs in the neighborhoods? And so and maybe you just automatically do both, and it's not necessarily a distinction. But I know in the States here, there may be two different groups. One would be looking to make arrests, work cases, and the other group may be working more the problem solving aspect to an issue.
Yeah, I guess in that I would be the former. Like we were looking at not on a problem in the broad scale of things. I think ultimately the intention is to have focus investigations with the aim of solving an issue at the macro level, right? But it was definitely more micro, like conducting actual long-term investigations. Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right, so you're there couple years, and then you go. Is it Halton Regional Police Services? Is this similar work, or is this something different?
For the most part, the exact same work.
Yeah. Was that something you were just assigned, or did you put in for that transfer?
I put in for that transfer. Yeah, my wife and I, we moved from Alberta back to Ontario, and I sort of did learn that there was an opening at the Halton Police, so I applied specifically for that role.
It's all right. It's fascinating here. I'm looking at some of these areas and bringing up a map, and I grew up in northwestern Pennsylvania, and so this isn't too far away. I remember actually on the bunny ears on the TV, we actually got a Ontario TV station. But it's interesting to me. Like I haven't heard of. I'm looking at, as I said, I'm just as you're talking here and looking up some of these places on your resume. There's places I was like, wow, I've never heard of that place at all. And so it's fascinating to me because I know a little bit about the area, but obviously not enough.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people know, or maybe like your listeners might be predominantly sort of American listeners. I could be mistaken, but I know sort of hearing about some of these Ontario and Alberta places, they're not all that well known, although I think Edmonton is probably more well known perhaps than like Halton region. Yeah, but to put things in context, like Halton, you have a map up, but Halton region is sort of in the general area of where Toronto is,
Right.
a short distance away.
Okay. And all right. And then eventually you're where you are now, which is in Hamilton Police Services. And this is in the same general area, right?
Yep. So very close to Halton, basically a neighbor, about 50 minutes to 1 hour away from Toronto.
Okay. Is this a different objective?
It's more of sort of a catch-all now, sort of bridging that divide between like divisional and focus, but It varies week to week. Yeah.
Okay. So now you've done a little bit of both. Do you have a preference or of whether you like to be focused or maybe have some diversity? What's your preference?
Such an interesting question. I've been asked that a couple times by other people before, and I really don't think I have a preference. I like sort of having that focused perspective on like an issue or like a couple issues. But then at the same time, I also like sort of having that divisional catch-all where you never really know each day, each hour what you're going to be dealing with. So I think if I had to make a decision, it would be sort of like almost just I like the not knowing what I'm going to be doing that day. So I think yeah. Honestly, as long I think it's such a cheesy answer, but I think as long as I'm sort of working in this field, I like the unpredictability of it.
Yeah, I can see that. I do. I think I like variety.
Me too.
I do like this idea of working on just fires come up, what I'll call fires. Like there's just something comes up, it needs my attention. I need to research it, do work on it, and get it out the door, so to speak. And there's long-term projects have their place. But I do know that I get to the point where I'm like, I just want this project to end and go away.
Yeah, I think I'm somewhat similar. I like you. I get possibly like you. I get bored pretty easily. I like being able to have some variety and work on different things at different times. So as long as I think you and I are in this field, I think that's going to be something that we sort of lean on. Like, you never really know what the day is going to throw at you. But as long as you're sort of doing crime analysis on some topic, you're having a great time.
Yeah, and it's the people, right? I mean, I can imagine that whether it's you're focused or whether it's diverse, it's the people that you're interacting with, and you're going back and forth with questions and answers and problem solving. I mean, that's where like it really excites us. And you get into a situation where it's just the back and forth isn't there, or maybe you're out on an island somewhere and it's just not having necessarily those great people to work with. It makes it a lot tougher.
I agree. Yeah.
We'll talk later about the Ontario Crime Analysis Network, but I do see here on your resume that you were the 2023 nominee for the Outstanding Crime Analyst of the Year from this network.
Yeah, that was nice to be a nominee. Yeah, I worked on an investigation and it was pretty interesting. I wish I could talk about the investigation right now, but it's still before the courts. But I will say just sort of being recognized was nice. Yeah.
And all right, so is that something that you were nominated or was it self-nominated? How did that work?
I was nominated. Yeah, I didn't self-nominate. Someone else, a close colleague of mine, nominated me, which was nice.
Yeah, that's always a good feeling, isn't it? It's like, thank you for thinking of me. That's one thing I have really appreciated later in life is just I'll tell people that's like, you know what, thank you for thinking of me. And that's you don't have to, right? And we're all so busy and everything else and not there's times that just not on people's radar. So when it does happen, it does feel good.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was unexpected. I wish there was more of that. Like supporting our peers and cheering on our colleagues is really nice.
Hi everyone, this is data scientist Andrew Wheeler. For my PSA is if you ever think to yourself, can't you use AI to do that? Just stop right there and don't say that sentence. I know that that's more for the managers and the crime analysts out there, but every single time somebody has come to me with, well, can't you use AI to solve that? It's never a good question to actually use any type of even not AI solution. So you need to think about what you actually want before you utter that sentence.
This is Jesus Varela with Rimmon. I just want to tell the world, remember your last letters. ATM, you don't have to say machine. It's already in there. CDRs, you don't got to say records. RMS, you don't got to say system. SARS, you don't got to say report. So just be careful. Watch that last letter.
All right, so let's move on then. And as I mentioned in your intro, one of the topics we want to talk about today is cyber vigilantism. Let's just set the table a little bit in terms of the topic, define what we're talking about, and then get in, and then maybe how you got involved.
So I started looking at cyber vigilantism, which is such a fascinating topic, by the way. I started looking at it while I was in grad school. I was doing a master's thesis at the time. And so my master's thesis was focused on the 2011 Vancouver Stanley Cup riot here in Canada. It was basically a sporting riot that sort of started towards the end of the Stanley Cup final. And there were a lot of riot participants or rioters who had either themselves publicized their own involvement in the riot. There was like police cars being lit on fire and other vehicles being tipped over. There was businesses being looted. It was just, it was quite the event. But there were a lot of people who either publicized their own involvement in the riot, like putting on social media, hey, look at me posing in front of like a police car on fire, for instance, or other people who were watching, standing by just in awe, taking videos and pictures of other people who were involved. And in the days, really hours, days, weeks after this riot, we sort of started to see a number of riot participants being identified and sort of unfortunately having to go through the repercussions of having been identified as being involved in a riot. So there were some people whose addresses were publicized, other people who were fired from their jobs. I think there were also stories of some people who perhaps lost scholarships or had like university acceptances revoked. So all basically as a result of having been involved in the riot, because there were people who saw their pictures, saw their video, and identified them. So that was really interesting to me. And of course, sort of from cyber vigilantism, I sort of, when I was doing my thesis, I started to think, okay, there's a shaming aspect involved, sort of there's civilian cyber policing involved, where people are sort of assigning their own punishments of what these people what they should be punished with, whether that's jail time or community service. It was interesting, and it still is a very interesting field of study to me.
If you look at the two parts of the term, it could be maybe several different things, right? I mean, if you just think of vigilantism, you could part of it. I was thinking that when I first saw the term, I was like, is this like networking and calling on people using social networks to act out, a way to mass and coordinate? And in terms of what you described, though, it seems different from that. It seems like this is something like responding to riots and what is the appropriate reaction to those that were identified as being rioters.
Yeah, what I found, there was more of a shaming aspect to it. Like people were making a very concerted effort to identify the people they were seeing online participating in the riot, publicizing their addresses if they could, their workplace if they could, sort of calling them names online and shaming them publicly, and then ultimately contacting police if it came to that with their identities. So the vigilantism wasn't very violent rhetoric, but it was ultimately people doing what they felt that they could in the moment to try to hold people who were involved in the riot responsible.
Where do you tend to draw the line as of maybe trying to assign what's appropriate and what's not appropriate?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned, like when I was doing the thesis, like I sort of saw that there were elements of like civilian cyber policing, like regular everyday people using the internet to sort of try to assign what they feel is an appropriate punishment to the rioters. And then I think the next step of that is people using social media to publicly shame the rioters. And so I think that was sort of where for me, I drew that line. You're either shaming them or you are just assigning your own ideas of what punishment should look like.
Yeah. I'd rather take the shaming than lose a job or my scholarship or like get kicked out of school. Like, right? Even though the shaming can feel awful, but it's like, man, there's some of those other things that you described as punishment. Look, I'm not sympathizing with rioters, but obviously that is punishment, right? In terms of some of those things that they went through. What are some other takeaways from this?
Well, I think the field, again, like I mentioned, it's such a fascinating field of study to me. But what I found like really interesting with this example, the Vancouver Stanley Cup riot, was because it was so fascinating, not because I condone it in any way, but just sort of that element of regular everyday people doing what they can to say, hey, I don't really accept what you did, and I'm going to do what I can to identify you. That was really interesting to me. But like I I mentioned. I didn't condone it in any way. I just found it a really interesting topic as an outsider looking in, like not as someone who lives anywhere close to Vancouver, just someone looking at what had happened and studying it was really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And you said it, but what was the reason for the riots?
It was a sporting riot.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was necessarily a reason. I think towards the end of the game, like you had some people who were starting to sort of get a little bit animated, and then I think it sort of just built from there. I don't know if there was one precipitating factor for why the riots started.
Yeah. I can imagine that the vigilantism also depends on the reason for the riot. And what I mean by that is I find it to be ridiculous that it seems like people's team wins and you riot, and your team loses and you riot. And I never really understood the reaction to a sporting event to then riot or burn furniture or whatever that people do in response to a sporting event. But I got to imagine from those that are seeking out to identify people, I mean, if they feel that what they're rioting about is not worth it or a little silly, then I can imagine that you're going to have more people out there doing this type of vigilantism.
Yeah. I mean, you sort of mentioned that in our previous question, like what is the reason for people being involved? I think, and I've sort of always thought about this. Like, I wonder if on some basic level, like people just are sort of looking for maybe that perfect situation, the perfect environment where they can sort of do something and get away with it. And maybe there's that idea that, okay, I see all these hundreds of people who are looting businesses and setting police cars on fire and climbing up on traffic poles, and maybe this is, to me, like maybe if I was put myself in a rioter's shoes, to me, like maybe this is the perfect opportunity where I can try to do something and get away with it. Like maybe I can go like smash out a window on a vehicle. So I've always wondered, and this is something that I sort of would love to explore, like in a future PhD program, but I've always wondered if maybe innately, like we have that desire to, I don't know, like engage in criminality, and just we're sort of waiting for the perfect opportunity to do so. For some people, not all, but I wonder if some people sort of think that way.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it is an interesting topic. And I start thinking about this topic in terms of the advice to law enforcement analysts. Somebody that is going through this is a vigilante. I mean, they're going to have, I'm guessing that these folks are going to have pretty good computer skills. They're going to be active on social media. They're going to have some information that might actually make them a pretty good source on maybe any topic that an analyst might be assigned.
Yeah, I mean, I think a part of an analyst job is to sort of do that digging. And on a basic level, I think that a lot of maybe cyber vigilantes, as we call them, might sort of have that skill, right? They're either they know somebody that they see online having participated in a riot, they're like, oh, I know that person, I'm going to publicize their name. Or maybe they're just really technologically savvy and they're sort of willing to do that research and digging and try to see who this person is. I don't know, but it is interesting that it sort of aligns with what we as crime analysts do, is that digging piece.
Yeah, because it seems like they would be pro-police.
Yeah,
right.
I think you can make that assumption. Yeah, I think it makes sense.
Yeah. So I mean, and it was funny. Who did I have on the show? Oh, it was Aidan Daly. Like he was just telling me a story where somebody posted a bunch of information that they heard. I don't know if it was on Nextdoor or what it was, and they were wondering, like, is something imminent? Is there something major going on? I think they did open up some kind of investigation on the person that posted it, but then they just eventually just asked him. It was very quickly. They just like, where did you get this information? And it ended up being not a very credible source. But the fact is that instead of, like, they just went up and asked them the question, which was a very simple way to problem solve. It's like, hey, where did you get that information? And that person was happy to give them where they got the information. So it was,
oh, really?
it didn't have to go any farther than that to where this guy gets or guy or gal gets put on a watch list for a decade or whatever it is. They just went up and asked them, and they're like, "Oh yeah, this is where I got it, no problem." And so I would imagine that maybe some of these vigilantes are the same way. They're like, "Oh, you're looking at this, or here's what I know about this, and they're here. Go talk to this person."
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. All right, let's move on to advice for our listeners. This is a topic that I like to ask all my guests, is just to give advice for our listeners, whether that's a new analyst, experienced analyst, or maybe even something to put on their radar for the future.
For aspiring analysts, like maybe something that they could sort of be looking into to getting involved in would be research. I think as analysts, like research is a very basic component of our role. Like we're always being asked to look at like massive amounts of data and make it make sense for stakeholders, for the commanders we work with, for the investigators we work with, just make it make sense. And so I think anytime that someone can sort of get some research experience and looking at a large amount of data and synthesize it, tell a story with it, visualize it in different ways, get creative, I think that's potentially like something that they could look into doing, and it'll certainly benefit them if they pursue crime analysis as a profession.
Yeah, I think, to me, one of the things that I don't do enough of, even today, as I work with data every day and whatnot, I think I don't do enough to put myself in the shoes of the consumer, like who I am giving the data to, or who I am giving a product to. Just being able to put myself into their shoes. How are they going to see this? What do they need to know? What do I expect them to do with the information I'm about to get them? I don't do that enough. So that would be something that I would add to your advice, is take the time to envision, like put yourself in the shoes of your consumers and how they are going to read and interpret your product.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think we should, as analysts, sort of look to present data in different ways, verbally but also visually. Different people learn in different ways, and so like if you have both components of a report, for instance, you have sort of one like a text component, but then you also have the data visualized in different ways. I think that's key. Like having a key findings or a key takeaway section of your report is really important, as opposed to just like dumping a whole bunch of data and findings on people. Sort of have one area where this is what you need to know, this is why it's important. That's really important too.
We mentioned earlier that you and I caught up at the IACA conference. There was something that I heard a couple people say. It wasn't just one person, it was a couple people say, and I thought it was fascinating, and this is on the topic of presenting, is that some of the presentations were rough, for lack of a better word. And I know there's, in terms of the IACA conference, they like people to be first-time presenters. Right? They do give a preference to if it's your first time presenting. But I thought it was interesting that a couple of people said that, like, man, there was some examples of presenters doing stuff that they really shouldn't be doing, like a don't be that analyst type of thing. And it's interesting that there's rarely anybody really talks about presenting, right? That's not normally a session at a conference, is how to present or do's and don'ts type of thing. Did you see or feel that is anything similar, or did you hear maybe something similar to what I just described?
No, I actually didn't. And sorry to I wouldn't discount what you found or what people sort of mentioned to you, but I didn't hear any of that actually. And maybe it was just because of the different sessions we went to, but I was really sort of inspired and like encouraged by the presentations that I went to. I actually felt that a lot of the presenters they seemed like professional, like orators, presenters. Like I was pretty inspired by the people that I went to go see. Yeah, probably took some notes on how maybe I can present things differently, maybe things that I could do differently and learn from the presentations that I went to. Yeah, sorry, I guess my experience differs a little bit, but again, it might have just been the people that we were speaking to. I really enjoyed every presentation, and I thought that all the presenters had really great strengths. Like some incorporated jokes. I don't know if I'm necessarily the funniest person, but maybe that's something I should do for my presentations, is put in some jokes, keep people sort of awake and alive when I'm presenting boring data. But yeah, I had a great time.
Yeah, I didn't see anything either, but maybe I don't. I usually give people the benefit of the doubt anyway. Like I'm like, okay, if this is their first time, or am I getting the gist of what they're saying, right? If they're doing minor things that maybe they shouldn't be, I'm not gonna hold their feet to the fire per se, or really critique them hard. I didn't see anything per se where it was really apparent. Like the classic one is when you have somebody that just puts like way too many words on one PowerPoint slide. Like,
Okay.
there's somebody that just doesn't ever look at their audience ever, or something like
Yeah.
that. Like there's ones that you're like, really, okay, hey, you can't, you really shouldn't be doing this. But I didn't see anything like that. I was just, as I mentioned, it was different conversations and it was from different people. So
Mm.
I thought it was fascinating. But I've gone on record as saying, like, I really would like to see more of the fundamentals taught of presenting, writing, those critical thinking. I mean, those are all things that are going to be on every single application for analyst jobs. And I think it is worthwhile to spend time on sessions on best practices for those things. So I really would like to see more of some of these basics be taught at conferences.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I know just based on my experience, the police services that I've worked for, there's been sort of like sessions that the services run either like yearly or every other year, or maybe multiple times a year, I'm not sure, where you can go and you can sort of learn tips and tricks for presenting, either catered towards analysts or catered towards just policing in general. I think I've maybe been to one, but I wouldn't think of myself as like a professional presenter at all. I think there's a lot to learn, and that it's a skill really, and I think you have to stay on top of it. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think if we can always learn different ways of presenting data and just presenting in general, it's important.
Yeah. All right. And speaking of the IACA, as I mentioned in your intro as well, is that you are now a certified law enforcement analyst. So congratulations.
Thanks.
And you just got it, right? It's September of just this past September.
Yeah, like we're a couple months in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fresh,
So
yeah.
I guess, yeah, so it's interesting to get your perspective. This is obviously quite an endeavor. I mean, you have to work for it, right? First of all, you have to qualify, right? There's all the things you have to go through in order to even qualify to take the certification exam. But then there's the stress of studying for the exam, and then obviously passing the exam. From you just completing the test, what's your perspective?
Yeah, there was a lot of studying to do for the exam, and maybe it's the nerd in me, but I actually had a really great time studying for it because I felt like I learned so much, right? Like even after having sort of done this work for a few years now,
Yeah.
like I learned a lot. Like there's different techniques for how to conduct your analysis, like different kinds of analysis to do. I had a really deep refresher on like quantitative tools and ways of presenting information and visualizing information. I had a good time studying it, but there's a lot of content to cover. Yeah, there's a lot to review.
I know, look, the certification, they want you to be well-rounded. They want you to be aware and have knowledge of a variety of different topics in law enforcement analysis. So, because I do hear folks, I use the word complain, that there's chapters or there's whole sections on stuff that they've never done or never will do. But I mean, I'm curious from your perspective in terms of some of the topics and learning some stuff maybe that you didn't do. How do you feel about the various topics that are part of the certification test?
I think it's a really well-rounded sort of overview of what crime analysis entails. I think like you sort of dive into different databases, the ones that you pay for, but also I mentioned at the outset of this interview, like there are some ones that are sort of freely available that I had never really used before. You delve a little bit more like into statistics, and then you also look at some of the sort of, I guess there's like American tools that we don't really have access we don't have access to in Canada, but
Mhm.
and I think for that reason I wasn't aware that they exist, so that was interesting. And then I think I learned quite a bit
Mhm.
from studying. Really happy that I went through the process for sure.
Yeah. Now, was there a topic that maybe you were surprised wasn't part of the certification test, or maybe one you would recommend they add?
Oh, maybe I'm not too much of a critical thinker, but I couldn't think of anything that perhaps was missed when I was studying it.
Yeah.
Maybe after this interview something will come to mind, but I couldn't think of anything that maybe I was like, oh, I wish this was covered. I think they covered a lot more than I was sort of expecting.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you do anything to celebrate?
I didn't. We were in Las Vegas for the conference.
Yeah.
I don't think I really celebrated. After I learned that I had passed, of course I called my wife and I was like, "Oh, I passed."
Yeah.
But no, I didn't celebrate at all.
Oh,
I know, lame, but no, I didn't celebrate. No.
I've told this story before, but I got when we were in Austin, Texas, and I think it was 2010, and I didn't even tell anybody I was taking the exam. I was so nervous because I didn't want to. I mean, if I failed, I didn't want everybody asking me about it and then have to tell them that I failed over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So, but then I passed, and I took myself. There was a steakhouse next to the conference we were in, and I actually went by myself and bought a ridiculous steak to
Awesome.
celebrate. So that's what I did. So but it is a feeling of accomplishment because it's not an easy exam. It
No.
takes work.
Yeah. It is a longer exam, and you have to study for it. Yeah, for sure. You can't wing it.
Yeah. So, all right. Very good. All right. I do want to talk a little bit about the Ontario Crime Analysis Network. We mentioned it because you were earlier because you were the nominee for their award. And they just recently became a charter member with the IACA. So the network has been around for quite some time, but only recently joined the IACA or became associated with, maybe that's a better way of describing it, associated with the IACA.
Yeah, I mentioned, I think you maybe even mentioned it as well. I've worked in crime analysis in Ontario for about 3 years now, and so I'm no expert on the Ontario Crime Analysis Network. Of course, I've been a member since I started working in policing in Ontario, but I'm no expert. But yeah, in the last, I think probably year or two, we did become associated with the IACA. It's a really great organization to be involved in. We learn a lot. There's a lot of different sessions that we have both in person and virtually. It's a large organization of crime analysts, and I'm really happy to be involved in it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think so. It says network. I'm always wondering when I hear network, and I know other regional associations use the word network, but it makes me think of you're part of an online listserv, and it's probably maybe an unfair definition to the word network. But when I see network, I'm thinking oh, this is where we're coming together to discuss or ask questions about particular topics, and then we're learning, as opposed to maybe an association where you have beyond just networking, you are holding training and you're holding you got websites and you got stuff beyond just a listserv or a forum.
Yeah, I don't know necessarily where it's called OCAN sort of falls. I think we have a number, like I mentioned, there's a number of training opportunities throughout the year where analysts from the province, different parts of the province will come together, and we'll either discuss one or multiple topics, and we travel there's different conferences and different training opportunities held in different cities across the province. So yeah, it is sort of, I don't know, I think network, or a group of just analysts who will come together and share best practices and learn about different areas of policing, discuss different topics. Yeah.
All right, well, let's move on to the IALEA conference then, and it's going to be in Vancouver. I just sat down with Alexander Gulde, and we went over a lot of parts of this conference, whether it's registration or the calls for presenters. From your perspective, what are you looking forward to in the conference this spring?
Good question. I'm really interested because obviously I was just at the IACA conference in Las Vegas a couple months ago. And I'm looking forward to sort of having a similar experience at IALEA. Being in Canada, I'm really interested to see what investigations are being worked on by Canadian analysts. I know it's international, but I sort of expect to see a lot of Canadian content. So that's going to be really interesting to see. Looking forward to meeting analysts from across the country. There's a lot of analysts that I have not had the opportunity to meet. So I'm looking forward to meeting some new people there too. I would say that those are probably the two things, some of the Canadian investigations that are going on, Canadian involvement in investigations, meeting some Canadian analysts. That'll be really interesting. And then, of course, I'm also thinking about potentially presenting. So I'm sort of exploring what I could maybe speak about, and maybe I could improve my presentation skills. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Yeah. Have you ever been to Vancouver?
No, I've never been to Vancouver.
Neither
I
have I.
always hear great things. Yeah, I hear great things.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be interesting. I am really looking forward. I hope to go. I am in this, I think, a similar boat as you, in that I'm looking to put in a presentation, and I'm hoping to get an opportunity to go. I have never been to Vancouver either, and I'm definitely interested in just going to an IALEA conference that's not in the U.S.
Yeah. Have you been to an IALEA conference before? Look, I'm asking the questions now. I should be the one answering them.
No. I tell people, this can be a conversation, so you feel free to ask me questions. So yeah, I have been to a couple of them. My last one was in Dallas. When was Dallas? That was like 2 or 3 years ago. So yeah, I think it'll just be an opportunity, as you mentioned. I expect there to be a lot of Canadians there, but I also expect it still to be international, and you're going to have a variety of analysts there and a variety of perspectives.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So I'll put a link to Alex and I's conversation in the show notes, along with additional information for those that may be interested in going to the conference. It will be April 7th through the 11th. And as right now, registration is open. All right, Eathan, you mentioned starting your PhD, but you put a little bit of a pause on that, and now you're looking to get back to the PhD. So I'm interested to know what as you're planning this comeback to get back into the PhD, what this looks like.
Yeah, I am also looking forward to seeing what it looks like after being out of the PhD for 10 years now. Like, I don't really know. I think I'm gonna, and of course, like, this is just dependent on me actually getting accepted to a PhD program. But I think if I'm accepted, I'm looking forward to going in with some like fresh ideas, maybe different perspectives, having now worked in policing for a decade-ish, right? Like, I think, of course, I'm going to go into a PhD program with a different perspective. So that's going to be really interesting. I'll also probably go in with a completely different research topic than what I was previously looking at. That'll be interesting. Working with some new professors, different professors I haven't met before. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting when you go in, are you going to feel like a fish out of water, right? Are you going back to the academia world now? Are you going to feel like maybe you don't belong?
Possibly, yeah. I probably will, to be honest. Yeah, it's been so long. Not that long, I mean, a decade, but
it is obviously that's another endeavor to take on. I am always impressed with people that have the discipline and the drive to finish a PhD. It is quite an accomplishment, but I think you'll settle right in and finish the PhD, and again have a great sense of accomplishment.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, that desire or that passion for like research really never left me in the last 10 years. I think if anything, I just sort of started to pose more questions for myself and getting interested in more and more or different topics. So yeah, I'm looking forward to, again, if I get accepted, like researching these different areas of interest.
Yeah. And I think that's something that I think that's not something you can't teach, that hunger for more, right? Being curious and wanting to explore. I mean, I think there is something that most people, they wouldn't go back 10 years, right? I didn't even try it, even attempt to do a PhD program, but I can't imagine going back 10 years later and trying to take it on. But I do feel that those that, as I mentioned, that have gone through and completed their PhD, it takes a certain level of desire and just being really curious and wanting to explore.
Yeah, I agree. I have several friends who've completed their PhDs, and like I look at them with awe. I'm like, wow, like you did it. And just hearing some of their experiences, like I know it can be really tough, especially towards the end when you've been in it for so long. So we will see what the PhD holds for me if I get accepted.
All right, very good. All right, let's finish up with personal interest then. You are into photography. Now, do you consider yourself a photographer?
Yeah, sure. I think, yeah, I'd probably say I'm a photographer, not a professional one, but I love photography. Yeah, I'm always the person taking pictures of where I am, where I'm traveling, cool things I'm seeing. Yeah, I like photography. It's one of
Yeah.
my interests.
Yeah. So do you have a focus? Do you have something that you normally take pictures of? Is it people, places, things?
Yeah, I love taking pictures of places like landscape photography. I try to
Hmm.
not have people in my pictures, so it's always just like oceans and trees and just the outdoors, nature. Like I just love outdoor nature photography.
Hmm.
Yeah. And if there's someone in the shot, then I'll just patiently wait for them to leave so I can get the perfect shot with no people in it.
Yeah. An analyst that doesn't like people. Who would have thought about
Yeah.
it?
Not in my pictures, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. So how long have you been a photographer?
I think, well, I've always been the person who's taken. I remember like back in high school, like I went on a trip to New York and I came back with like 300 pictures of just like buildings and streets and like taxis. And so I think looking back, like I don't know, maybe it's been at least 15-ish years where I've just
Mhm.
really enjoyed taking like just disgusting amount of pictures of where I'm at when I'm traveling. So yeah, we'll say
All right.
15 years. Yeah.
All right. Good. Well, do you have a website or do you share any of your photos?
Yeah, I have an Instagram page for my photography. So it's
Yeah.
Lindsay Outdoors, and I just share pictures of sort of where I've been. There's a couple of pictures from when I was in Las Vegas a couple months ago. But again, I'm not sure if that was that interesting. There's a picture of like the Eiffel Tower restaurant and a picture of like
Mhm.
the Las Vegas Strip on there. Yeah. So
All
it's
right.
Lindsay Outdoors. Yeah.
All right. Very good. Very good. And then you're also into martial arts. We happen to be recording this when the Tyson-Paul fight is this evening. So I wanted to get your perspective on that fight. For those that might not be aware, you got Mike Tyson, that I think is 58 years old, and Jake Paul, who I think's 27. So there's a 30-year difference between these two fighters, and they're going to box it out this evening.
Yeah, yeah. I'm excited for it. I don't know if I'll be able to like if I'll make it tonight to
Hmm.
watch it, but I'm definitely going to be watching sort of the highlights, and it's on Netflix. So hopefully it's not only live stream. Like hopefully I can watch it maybe tomorrow when I have some more time. But even if I don't get to watch it, I'm excited for the outcome. I have no idea which way it's going to go, but
Yeah.
from what I've heard is I think Jake Paul sort of wanted to make boxing sort of, I think, more popular again.
Hmm.
I remember
Yeah.
when I was younger, like I was really into watching like Manny Pacquiao, and I was really into boxing for a while. And but I have sort of not been tuning in for all this time. So
Yeah.
maybe this is boxing's, I don't know, reintroduction, so to speak.
Yeah. No, I remember Mike Greenberg from ESPN. I think he's made comments several times that in the 70s, boxing was in the top three of sports in the U.S., right? I
Wow.
think, and he said it was really popular, and which is kind of hard to fathom at this point in time, because it's just I think the sport just has probably struggled a little bit with the lack of stars and attention to this, and so I'm not sure what I really expect out of the whole thing, and it amazes me that at 58 years old that you're going to be part of a professional, boxing match.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like in my 30s and I can imagine doing that. Like it's a hard sport, like 12 rounds. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if this fight's going to be 12 rounds, but 12 rounds, 3 minutes. My understanding is that this fight tonight's going to be down to 2 minutes. It is
Yeah.
tough. It's tough. Having done it
Yeah.
in the past, not professionally at all, but just sort of having like sparred and karate and stuff like that. It's tough. So hats off to
Yeah.
them for doing it.
Now, I saw some folks talking about it today, and it is going to be 2 minutes. I think it's only going 8 rounds, and
Okay.
and they started talking about the gloves, right? The gloves they're using are 14 ounces, which is heavier than most heavyweights use, and the heavyweights use 10 ounces normally. And as a fight goes on, does those gloves get heavier to the point where your hands go down a little bit, leaving you exposed. So it's just like anything else. I mean, there's so much analytics involved in it, and so much things to think about in different angles. I mean, it may be, if it's a classic Tyson fight, it'd be over in the first round. But I mean, once it gets a little bit farther, there is a lot of different components to any boxing match.
Yeah, we'll see how long it lasts. It'll be interesting. I know that Tyson, I think I've heard that Tyson wants to like seek a knockout if he can. So we'll see how long the fight lasts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, geez, I can't imagine. I actually can't imagine him going more than 4 rounds. I can't.
Yeah, just stamina wise, or
just stamina wise. I mean, a lot of times he didn't have the stamina when he was in his prime, right? And let alone when he's 58 and hasn't done this regularly. So, but yeah, I think it'll be interesting. From my point of view, look, if Tyson wins, that is a huge feather in his cap, right?
Oh yeah.
I think if Jake Paul wins, I'm like, oh, well, you beat somebody that was 58 years old. Like, I feel that there's not as much to gain for Jake Paul as there is Mike Tyson.
Yeah. Like it's maybe more of like a legacy thing, right? I don't know if Tyson intends to like continue this. I don't know, but yeah, it might come down to him like a legacy thing. Like he wants to go out with the best outcome, right? We'll see.
Yeah, no, and it is. I think didn't they actually make a Rocky movie out of this? Like, wasn't there like Rocky 5 or 6 or Balboa or something like that, where he actually came out of retirement and fought somebody younger?
Yeah.
It seems to me that was actually a Rocky movie that we're going to experience for real tonight. So
I've never actually watched the Rocky movies. But yeah, I mean, that would make for a really good movie plot if it isn't one already.
Yeah. I actually, Rocky 3. I don't know if I would just recommend watching one of them, but Rocky 3 is my favorite. So
okay, all right.
For whatever that is, that has Mr. T in it, and Hulk Hogan has an appearance in there. It is my favorite Rocky movie. So
cool. Okay.
All right. Eathan, let's finish up with words to the world. This is where you can promote any idea that you wish. What are your words to the world?
Oh yeah, I don't know if I have like an idea to promote. Maybe just if I had to give any words to the world, I would say just be kind, right? Like I know it's such a niche thing to hear, like from celebrities and on talk shows and stuff. Like be kind to one another, be nice to one another. But I think it's just always important to remain nice to people, because you never really know whether what you say to someone is going to make or break their day, right? And not everyone's going to have the same viewpoint as you all the time, but everyone's going to be going through something that you're unaware of. So I think just be nice to people, be kind to people.
All right. Well, this doesn't segue well, but I leave every guest with, you've given me just enough to talk bad about you later.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate you being on the show, Eathan. Thank you so much, and you be safe.
No problem. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for making it to the end of another episode of Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. You can show your support by sharing this and other episodes found on our website at www.leapodcasts.com. If you have a topic you would like us to cover or have a suggestion for our next guest, please send us an email at leapodcasts@gmail.com. Till next time, analysts, keep talking.